to another episode of the Analytical Innovations Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. William Monroe, and today we actually have two guests on the podcast, Brett Hickey and Patrick Murphy. I'll introduce Patrick Murphy in a little bit when we bring him on, but first I'm going to talk to Brett Hickey. Brett is the founder and CEO of Star Mountain Capital, and he's scaled it to over $4.5 billion in assets since 2010 through masterful business building in the lower middle market. He's a Citigroup Wall Street veteran, turned Harvard OPM alum, and Ironman top finisher. So he's an athlete as well. He's engineered one of America's best workplaces with STAR values, employee ownership, and team alignment. So Brett, welcome. Mark Froelich here at Analytical AI just praises that you've done an incredible job over the decades since he met you about a decade ago. So I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, Mark's been a great guy and a tremendous advocate down in the Alabama community for us.
Well, that's great. What do you remember what sparked your friendship with Mark, and kind of how has that influenced kind of your respective paths?
Maybe a little bit of background, because as I have three children, I try to think about what things in the past formed things with myself for better and worse, and try to amplify the better and mitigate the worse. And as I look back, I started my first business in the late 90s, learned to code and whatnot, taking advantage of the internet, and had a small but successful exit back then, and then moved to Wall Street to work for Citigroup, which at the time was the largest financial services firm in the world, to do investment banking, mergers and acquisitions, and strategic advisory work for some of the largest investment firms in the world, banks, insurance companies, asset managers, and so forth. The important role of fly in the wall as a young person, modeling and so forth, not setting strategy, but you learn a lot. You learn a lot cranky, you learn a lot with a lot of great people, and so I was very fortunate. I left in 2004, seeing a real opportunity in what folks refer to as the lower middle market. So in the U.S. economy, there's sort of the startup world, often associated with venture capital. Mm-hmm. You then have the larger world, but there's actually a huge ecosystem that's in between that startup venture world and the large efficient world. And that represents somewhere around 44% of US GDP, which are businesses that generally will have between about 5 million and 50 million of EBITDA. So if that is a little bit of context, I saw that market with aging demographics, limited capital availability, and businesses that wanted not just capital, but they wanted strategic capital. So capital that could help them say, how do I keep growing the right way? I've taken my business to a certain level, or I'm looking to acquire a competitor, but I've never done that before, and I want to do it the right way. I see on paper how it can be valuable. And so that's how I met Mark. Was managing money for I was managing money for different state investment programs where we were helping align purpose with profit, creating jobs, investing in underserved areas of the U.S. economy, including in parts of Alabama, and also investing in women and minority-owned businesses, veterans, and so forth, which we've always had a large passion to help support. Mark has a similar passion, and Mark is also somebody that's a hands-on, roll-up-the-sleeves guy that likes to help add value to business owners and authentically understand them and really try to be helpful to them and their mission. So it's really capital with services. And so Mark was a partner helping us find and work with different businesses in Alabama to evaluate them and assist them in developing their plans. And that's how Mark and I initially met, and just a high integrity, high authenticity guy with aligned mission and purpose.
Yeah. No, that's great. And Mark just asked me to just relay to you that he really does feel like that you've done an incredible job with Star Mountain Capital, and that he's honored to be a part of the Star Mountain family. So yeah, it's high praise from him. So again, it's great to be speaking with you today. So as kind of a follow-up to that, you mentioned this lower middle market investing. It seems like you found a niche where that was kind of being left behind, that other people weren't really focusing on as much. Is that what drove you to focus on that investment strategy?
It was, and it was a combination of things. I think when you're in investment banking, I was very fortunate, again, at Citigroup, the volume of information that I was able to see. So again, other folks, the senior folks in the business that are driving the strategy, driving things. But for us, especially in the pre-AI days, we're cranking through the models. And so you have to understand enough of what's going on so you can help financially figure out, does thesis translate? If you're going to acquire businesses, integrate them, spin off divisions, do they work or not? If you're going to develop new investment strategies, how are they going to position for an investor in their portfolio? How are they going to compete in the market? What's the market size? What are the long-term trends? And, that aspect really just brought to life, I think, the opportunities within the lower middle market, but realizing that you have to approach it very differently. So that was really what I think germinated that opportunity in the lower middle market, and basic laws of supply demand. Think about any entrepreneur of any business. If you say, well, what's entrepreneurship 101? One is you want to identify a problem or problems that are really valuable to be able to solve for customers. Two is you hope that those problems, not only are they very meaningful, but they're also a large market opportunity. And then you want to look at and say, well, how are you distinctively different than your competitors to really bring a value proposition to market? And so taking a step back, when I started, my first at University of Mount Royal in Canada before finishing my undergrad degree at McGill, I studied entrepreneurship. And it's kind of like these are the steps you go through in looking at any business in the lower middle market. You've got almost half of US GDP, extremely fragmented marketplace, positive thematic tailwinds of aging demographics, labor complexity and barriers to entry to finding these businesses, developing rapport with them, evaluating them, and then actively working with them, which is very different than the larger capital markets. In the larger capital markets, you've got bigger businesses with big corporate finance teams working with large consulting firms, McKinsey's and Bain's of the world, working with large investment banks, Goldman Sachs of the world, and they've got the world mapped out well. Then you get into the lower middle market where they just can't afford to be in those large firms that need to work with larger volume, generally just don't work down there. And so then you say, well, who's here to help me? How can I figure out the best way to grow and develop my business? And so our view at Star Mountain was to bring large market expertise and capabilities to these great smaller businesses and some of the best businesses in America. For the business owners, it's the value proposition, and then for investors, it's helping them tap into, almost an emerging market type of an investment opportunity, but without taking emerging market type of risks, right? One of my former professors from Harvard Business School recently did a paper, Josh Lerner, who's a top global economist, called "Hidden in Plain Sight," which I loved it. It's like right in everybody's backyard. What are all these different businesses, from roadside repair to preschool chains, all these things that we use every day, but most investors don't have access to it. So that's really the value proposition that we bring investors and the value proposition we bring business owners. And that's what germinated, the launch of Star Mountain just over 15 years ago.
That's great. And thank you for providing a couple of examples of what those things are. And yeah, I can see how it's not just because it's not as flashy as either really big things or really small things that are trying to be super innovative, that it may be underserved. So it's really fascinating how you found that niche. So would you say that's really the strategy and focus that you've used to grow Star Mountain from where it started to that over $4.5 billion under management today?
It is. And I think a lot of business owners, William, don't often put enough time and effort and research into their business plan. And a business plan needs to be agile and tactical, because the reality is some things grow faster than you think, some things grow slower than you think. The world evolves. COVID was something I didn't predict. Right now, we've got a bunch of geopolitical risks. So people need to have, I believe, business plans that are agile and tactical. As a finance geek, I, of course, love to build all mine in Excel. I still feel more comfortable thinking with numbers, and which is kind of fun. My son recently won this pneumatic math competition, which is really cool and kind of endearing and fun as far as building kids. I always sort of joke and say I have 3 actual children, but my first one, if you count it, is Star Mountain. And it's had a lot of learning curves along its 16 years of life. But ultimately, you want to have a great business plan, an agile business plan, and take a step back, at least once a year and really look at your business plan, make sure it still makes sense, and figure out if you should pivot or work on different things. And for Star Mountain, we're built to be a specialist. We're an investment specialist that's focused on the lower middle market. And ultimately, we serve our investors and the businesses we invest with. And with our investors, our objective is very clear. It's to bring them alpha, or a premium risk-adjusted return, and low market correlated returns. I mean, look at the world today with the questions around software right now, and what's AI doing to software, and how concentrated portfolios got. Investors want to build more diversified portfolios. These lower middle market companies, like we just invested in a 4th generation, 100-year-old family owned business that does cement batches. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of this before, but you will have used it every day, where tarmacs for airports, bridges, roads, all these things being built. Well, think about, how does that cement and concrete and everything, how does that all get put together? Who does that? What machines do you need? This is sort of, I'll call it basic, boring things. But if you think about how that fits in your portfolio relative to your Microsoft, Google, NVIDIA, whatever it is, and say, well, if XYZ happens to NVIDIA, how's that going to impact this business? And the answer is very little, right? So the risks are very uncorrelated. And from an investing perspective, that's an extremely powerful tool, especially when we're in very concentrated, sort of toppy market valuations. And so we're very clear on that. And I think a key part of a business is you don't grow into other things that you are not. Like, we're not a large market player. We don't compete in the larger markets. We're very focused on where we live, and we just continue to get better at it. And that over time has created a lot of competitive advantages for us. And we've grown at a reasonable pace. There's some firms that have grown way faster, and some firms that have grown way slower. But we started with a very purposeful plan, and therefore we're content with it. Today, I'll finish with, you see a lot of noise in the market, a lot of firms, a lot of challenges, a lot of investments. How's it going to play out? Well, TBD. But we have a plan. So when software was booming, we didn't chase those shiny coins and say, well, the value is this, so I can lend at this price and I'm still safe, or it's going to grow forever. We said, we're not specialists there. Here's where we're specialists. We stay focused. It doesn't mean those other opportunities aren't good, but it's not what we do. And I think in investing, you either want to be a large, global market leader, think, KKRs, Blackstones, BlackRocks and stuff that can really deliver, sort of efficient, large market resources, or somebody like Star Mountain as a true specialist and an alpha specialist. But a lot of firms get stuck in between those two worlds. And then you say, well, what value proposition do you really bring? And I think the answer is very unclear. And typically those businesses over time don't do as well for their customers, clients, or employees. And then lastly, it's fun. It's fun to help companies grow and add value to real people, real businesses, real economy. I lost my mom young to cancer, but both my parents were school teachers, and I think teachers inherently are often just very involved in their community and whatnot, and caring, probably one of the things that leads you to be a teacher. And that's always been something that is fun, it's purposeful, and I think it also helps build a stronger culture where our team at Star Mountain doesn't just look at it and say, well, we're trading stocks. We're helping people grow great businesses, making their businesses more defensive, helping protect those employees, their families, their jobs, adding value to the community. It's not just numbers. It's real life and the real economy, and that's always been, I think, part of our value system you referenced.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Would you say that value system is part of what has enabled you to attract the kind of high horsepower talent that you've been able to bring on board? I think Mark had mentioned you've attracted folks from a lot of the bigger places like Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, Fortress Private Capital.
Yeah.
So do you think it's those values that bring people to Star Mountain?
It's a great question. I believe that's part of it. I think it started with, if I look at some of the earlier success I had with some very sophisticated and some of the most sophisticated investors in the world investing their capital with us, and then, extremely successful employees and partners of mine that don't have to work, are choosing to work and have lots of choices in what they do. Why do they choose working with me? A very big part of it is our business plan. It's having a great business plan where they want to invest their capital and they want to invest their time. So it starts with sort of a product first approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Then I think that it really matters to them, the culture. People want, the highest performing people want to be a place they matter, want to be part of a team and to work hard together and, tackle challenges and opportunities together. And I think that's fun and that's exciting. And one of my friends, Rob Kaplan, who's now back as the vice chairman of Goldman Sachs again, and used to be a professor at Harvard where I first met him, and actually for a brief period, helped run Harvard's endowment, one of the largest endowments in the world, and so on and so forth. Just an incredibly talented individual, and ran the Dallas Fed and so forth as well. He talks about culture and saying there's different cultures that can work, but rarely do different cultures combined together work properly. So, for example, you can have what I'll call a very team-centric culture that says we're all going to drive hard together, or you can have a very missionary type of culture that's more individualistic. And you see it in sports as well, right? Sometimes you see a sports team with a whole bunch of amazing athletes that don't actually win. But the talent, the raw talent on paper is there. And sometimes you see teams that work incredibly well together and they win. In general, that's the philosophy we have. But the key is you have to be clear in your culture. Then you have to align incentives and motivation and manage accordingly. So, somebody else I've been fortunate to spend time with, John Mack, who is the CEO of Morgan Stanley. He's done some case studies with Harvard Business Review and others, and talks about, in this one case, I remember a really high performer, but that culturally was, I'll call it sharp elbowed, but great at performance, really driving value. And he said, if I promote this person, what does that do to the culture? So individually, super high performing, but you have to look at it from a team concept and aspect and see how that's going to fit. And that's what we believe at Star Mountain. I think that's key to leadership, is defining a culture, being clear, and that way people can self-select in. Look, there's more than one culture that can win. Yeah. But what we do at Star Mountain is we want to attract people that say, this is where I want to invest my capital. This is where I want to invest my time. I'm here to support each other. You mentioned, Mark, referring to the Star Mountain family. That sort of brings a tear to my eye, and that's what I want. This, to me, as I said, this is my first child. Yeah. And I really think of it as a family. Many people here we're very close with each other. Our spouses are, our children, people living close. And that, to me, really makes a lot of magic, because you get people that are really driving hard with each other, not saying, well, this isn't my job or that's your thing. Like, sure, we're here to drive value for our investors. That is the North Star at Star Mountain. And we are also our investors. So we're here to drive value for our investors, which means our third-party investors and our capital.
Yeah.
And we're very clear about that. And so there might be some people that are extremely talented, but might be better suited in a hedge fund type of job or some other type of career that better suits their desires, there's not a right or wrong. I think clarity of mission, clarity of culture. And so ours is Star, S is shareholder. right? That's our North Star, is being investors. T is trust, accountability, and respect. And we really don't deviate from our values. Doesn't make us perfect, but we're clear and we drive hard at that. And I think over time, those concepts that can almost sound fluffy or fuzzy a little bit actually end up being very, very powerful. And today, I think that's actually one of the most powerful things, is the engine we built. Our engine is our team. Our team is how it all works together. If you think of a car and you say, I've got the best wheels ever. Okay, but it's all got to work together, not just the best pieces. And that's why everybody's got to really work as a team to find opportunities, find challenges, address them, and drive hard. And over the years, people have seen this success, and success sort of begets success. I'll end with, it was really hard when you start that, because people listen like, yeah, but I don't know. Now, with the success we have behind us, it starts to become a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, which sure makes my job a lot easier and is frankly a lot of fun. I think the next 15 years of Star Mountain are going to be pretty incredible. I mean, every day it's a different business. I wake up feeling very fortunate to be a part of.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's exciting. Well, Brett, as I mentioned at the beginning, I also have Dr. Patrick Murphy with us today, and really excited to introduce him to speak with us as well, continue the discussion about entrepreneurship. Dr. Murphy is the Goodrich Chair of Entrepreneurship at UAB's Collat School and the architect of its #1 emerging Bearfield entrepreneurship program. It's had over 378% enrollment growth and over $7 million raised for that program. Patrick's a Techstars mentor, an author on entrepreneurial mindset, and an ecosystem builder. And Patrick bridges that academic rigor. I mean, you've talked several times about your professors, Brett. So it's kind of great to bring somebody from that world as well on to continue this conversation about entrepreneurship. So Patrick, excited to have your insights along Brett's practitioner's wisdom here today. So thanks for joining, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, if I could say one thing as well,
yeah,
having
go ahead.
grown up with a grandfather's a professor at university, parents as teachers, some of my closest friends are different, professors and stuff with us. Thank you for your service, Patrick, because really it's you all as the teachers are the lifeblood of not only entrepreneurship, which really makes America special, that innovation, that entrepreneurship. I'm on the board of the Foreign Policy Association, and we had our annual dinner for finance yesterday, and different leaders from all businesses all talk about that. But who creates that? It's the teachers and the professors for our children, for the students. So thank you all, because I think you all deserve far more praise than you get, because we're really the output of all of your all efforts and hard work.
I appreciate that, Brett. Thank you.
So Patrick, I mean, you've done a lot of scaling up of the UAB's entrepreneurship program. Brett's mentioned a few times values, mission, and culture, as well as talking about treating a business like a family or like a parent in some ways. How, from your perspective, Patrick, how do you help instill that entrepreneurial mindset and that team building DNA in the next generation of business leaders?
A couple of things came to mind when I was listening to Brett talk. He talked about problems leading to opportunities, and then and only then you can innovate and formulate an idea in relation to the opportunity, but it's all got to start with a problem that actually matters to people. And I was impressed by how he talked about the focus that one maintains. As they get larger, they kind of stay small in certain ways, and knowing not only what you are, but knowing what you are not as an entrepreneur, I think comes from having a clear problem at the beginning that you want to solve and never losing sight of that. So a lot of the themes and deeper concepts and foundations that we teach in my program came across clearly. I can comment on them a little bit. It's my perspective is informed by, I've done this work around the world. I've done it in other countries. I've lived in other countries, and I built my career in the city of Chicago. Brett, I don't know if you knew that. Bill, William, I think you know that. So I was informed a lot by those experiences in other places. And Brett mentioned culture a little bit, and I want to talk about culture and the power of culture and how it relates to values. We hammer home, when we try to teach the discipline of the entrepreneurial mindset, this concept of thinking globally and acting locally. Thinking globally essentially means that you can feel something around you. You can feel the power of culture, for example, which is important because culture is defined by shared values. People have to have shared values around what they believe is right, what they believe is wrong, what ought to be done. And there needs to be a kind of shared, deeper level agreement around that, to the extent that you don't go around talking about it all the time because it's implicit and you regard it as pretty much true. That's really important in a culture, a community, or a family, or an entrepreneurial venture, because those shared values have the character of expectations about the future. And those shared values are what enable you to say no and know what you are not and know what you don't do. And so I heard a lot of that depth as Brett was talking about Star Mountain Capital. And it's clear that he's scaled deep as he's scaled up. And if you scale deep with your culture and the problems you're trying to solve and the values, and those deeper roots allow you to grow higher, just like a deeper foundation helps one build a taller building. And it's very important to entrepreneurship. Growth is definitive to entrepreneurship. Without growth, you don't have entrepreneurship. It's got to be a growth or a growth orientation or something around growth, because that's what makes the inner parts coordinate, like the human body. If you hurt your ankle running and it changes your running form, eventually that can affect your hip, even though your ankle and your hip aren't directly connected. So entrepreneurial ventures are like that. Entrepreneurial movements are like that. And he also mentioned the successes and the failures. I can't remember how he phrased it, but he's talking about reflecting on wins and losses over time. That's important too, because growth generates waste. Anything, anywhere in the biological world or the business world, if it's growing, it's going to generate waste. Trees shed their leaves, snakes shed their skin, children, Brett has children he was talking about, grow out of clothes. And so the byproduct of growth, if you have the right entrepreneurial mindset, can be repurposed to fuel future growth. Leaves fertilize, I guess, the forest. Something probably eats snake skin on the ground. Smaller children can wear the clothes that the larger children grew out of. So it can all be repurposed. So I heard that clearly as he was talking about it, and it's very inspiring. And then back to think global, act local, which I started with. I think it's really important in our country, and particularly when we educate the younger generation. And I'm thinking in particular about Gen Z. I'm Gen X. I taught millennials for 20 years. I love Gen Z. I love them, probably because they're the children of Gen X. I don't know what's going on here, but I love them because they have this kind of diversity of perspectives that probably derives from them being the first generation that grew up with technology that actually works, so they can research what they love in depth, and they can ignore what they don't like if they wish, and that forges a strong sense of identity, and they come out of it with this kind of changeless sense of who they are, which is the key to being able to navigate change. It's kind of ironic if you think about it, is what about you that doesn't change that enables you to navigate change in the environment? And Brett mentioned change in the environment. He used the word business plan, but he qualified it with agile business plan, modified, living document. You return to it once per year, which is vital, because if the environment changes, that means you have to evolve. And the things that an entrepreneurial venture has to do to evolve are pretty much exactly the same things an entrepreneurial venture has to do to grow. It's just that in growth, you're not really thinking as much about environmental change, whereas in evolution, which means to unroll, you're thinking about, even if you're big, you have to adapt, you have to change. Maybe you have to grow, maybe you have to shrink in certain areas, but very similar phenomena. So it all came across clearly. I love it. I can unpack anything that I just said. I'll stop there. Tried to drop you a few gems for your short videos there, William. I don't know if you'll get any or not, but hone in and ask me anything and I'll unpack it for you.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Real quick, I just wanted to pass it over to Brett and just see what your thoughts were on what Patrick said, if any of that resonated, kind of his unpacking of what he heard you say, if that resonates with how you're trying to continue to grow Star Mountain.
One of the things Patrick mentioned that I think people often don't utilize as an asset, as he talks about the trees shedding the leaves and that leaf becoming an asset to the ground of fertilization. I think that's challenges. Often people don't want to talk about challenges. They create cultures where people don't feel open and trusted. And I think that's important. One of the things that we pride ourselves on at Star Mountain is open, transparent, respectful, and robust debate so that we can talk about things. Everybody I talk to, when they come with something, they say, well, what's your recommendation and rationale? And we need to make sure when we have challenges, that we look at them. When we have victories, we look at them and say, what can we learn from all these things? I think sometimes cultures don't have enough feeling of safety. Sometimes leadership can feel insecure. And I think that there's a lot of good data around the importance of leadership being vulnerable and saying, hey, I'm human as well. I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. I prefer to learn other people's mistakes as much as possible. So I've built a big advisory group because it's painful sometimes learning your own mistakes. But the reality is we all need to learn from challenges. And so that means we have to be transparent about them. We have to discuss them, be aware. And I think that also creates a better risk managed culture as well. And if you can manage risk, one of the things we talk to business owners about, a safer business is a more valuable business. So if you can mitigate risk, you're worth more. If you think about what is an investor willing to accept as a return for a public equity stock versus buying a 10-year treasury, it's a very different expected return and willingness. So safety has value. And I think to really focus on safety, you have to be looking for risks, evaluating risks, and have a culture also that focuses on that. So I love the parallel to nature within that. I thought was really fun.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump back at him? Were you going to ask me to respond to that?
No, go ahead.
Okay, no, that's great. Yeah, challenges are key, and it's another thing that we really try to hammer into our students' heads in our program. Growth generates waste, and you can call it challenges, you can call it errors. A lot of great discoveries come from errors. Like the WD-40 story is a famous one. Whatever that compound they were trying to prevent condensation on missiles, I suppose it was, and it's like water displacement 40th iteration or something. And then the Post-it note, of course, is another famous example. So the entrepreneurial mind, and I'm sure Brett and his team and his organization, they have this in their culture, is attracted to challenges because of the growth that they can provide, and is also attracted to problems. That's really big for us. We know entrepreneurship starts with problems, so we try to help folks develop the mindset, the discipline of the mindset that will not compel them to avoid problems, but to go toward problems and figure them out, because the curiosity, which is an entrepreneurial superpower, in doing that can lead to things that are breakthroughs. That word problem is a rich word. In many world languages, the word for problem is the exact same word that is used for question. And so the implication in our culture, it's a little bit of a negative connotation if you say, I got a problem. But if you say, I got a question, it hits a little different. So we also spend a lot of time in our program teaching young entrepreneurs to think of problems as questions, because a problem calls for a solution in very much a functionally equivalent way to how a question calls for an answer. And it also cultivates your curiosity. And there's no cure for curiosity. And curiosity is a cure for boredom and all kinds of other things. So a very vital part of the entrepreneurial mindset. And then I think another thing goes along with it. We're kind of bridging the scholarly domain, which is my world, and the practitioner domain, even though I can tell Brett has a strong respect for education, and that's great. I really appreciate that. But in both cases, you have trial and error. We think of it as ready, fire, aim, not ready, aim, fire, but ready, fire, aim, because you need to put things into motion in order to get feedback from the environment. If you do not act, the environment will not give you feedback, and you need that feedback, the oscillation of feedback, in order to grow and perfect and evolve and unroll, like I said earlier. But scholarly world is very much the same way. I mean, an entrepreneurial venture is kind of like a theory. It's going to evolve and grow and make an impact. It can compete with other theories. Eventually, if it doesn't keep evolving, it can go defunct. It can be displaced by other theories. It can hold sway for a very long time, like Newton's theories, I think, 300, 400 years, they dominated physical sciences until they were displaced by the Einsteinian paradigm, which explained everything that the Newtonian one did, but it also explained a little bit more. And so there are a lot of parallels here, but I think it boils down to ready, fire, aim, thinking globally and acting locally, meaning thinking outside of where you are. But let me just close with this. Thinking global, I want to mention this because I think it's important for educating entrepreneurs and training young entrepreneurs. You can think global by looking at the way people do things in other areas, but you can be wise enough to know that if you're going to attack a problem in one corner of an industry, like Brett was talking about the different levels of the industry and different kinds of tranches and sectors and whatnot. But to do what he does, he's had to tailor and customize a little bit of the global principles to make sense locally. So thinking globally and acting locally. We do that too. Like my work in Chicago, when I raised money in Birmingham, I did very different things than what I did when I raised money in Chicago. I'm still raising money, but the way I act needs to be localized. But I think the other half of that, and this is interesting to me, it's something I've discovered since moving to Birmingham. I've been here 8 years now, but you can also think global, not by being in a moment in time and looking at other places, but you can be in one place and look through time, which means studying history. So 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, the history of Chicago, which I'm very familiar with, informs local action in a different way than the culture and history of Birmingham affects the way we do things in Birmingham. In Chicago, the Great Fire is a big part of it, for example. Our flagship incubator in our city is named after the Great Fire, 1871. In Birmingham, it's, of course, the civil rights movement, and there's a lot of breakthroughs, justice issues, a lot of bravery, a lot of challenging an existing order that was marginalizing members of the community. And so that kind of looking back at the culture and the history is important because local culture is downstream from local history. And local entrepreneurial action is often downstream from local culture, and so it's another way to think global because it expands your ideating and your conceptualizing.
Yep. Well, that's great. I really hate to cut us off because I feel like we're just getting started. So who knows? We might have to schedule another time to have another conversation because this is just too much fun.
Hey, let me just say it was an honor to be on here with this guy. I love what he's doing. I've heard of Star Mountain. Of course, I'm friends with Mark. So this was a big thrill for me to be here with Brad and, of course, with you, William, too.
Yeah, no,
thanks,
absolutely.
Patrick. Well, likewise.
Just real quick, rapid fire, just one last rapid fire question. Patrick, I think the most important question for somebody from Chicago, are we talking White Sox or Cubs?
I like them both. I'm not actually originally from there. I was there 20 years, so I can, whoever's winning, whoever's doing better, I'll support them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I've been to Wrigley Field a couple of times. It's just such a fun experience.
No, it's great. But I love both teams. I love Chicago.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Good example of candor being an important part of culture.
Yeah, there you go.